Hello everyone. This video is going to provide you with some information regarding sentence combining. This video will provide you with 5 tips on how to combine sentences using grammatical structures. Let's go ahead and get started. When we talk about combining sentences, we are often talking about using specific types of clauses and phrases. If during any part of the video you are unfamiliar with some of the terminology, specifically names like clauses, phrases, independent clauses, and so forth, please be sure to watch the video that covers basic concepts. That's going to review definition and sample information regarding what clauses and phrases entail. But for now, let's look closely at the 5 ways in which to combine sentences. First, we have colons or semicolons. In this particular formula, we're going to look at using colons or semicolons in order to join complete sentences. A great way to try to remember some of the combinations is to examine it from a formula perspective. So I like to treat it almost like math, where in this part, we're dealing with independent clauses. As I said before, please review the other video that covers basic concepts like independent clauses. But for now, let's treat these as complete sentences. So first, we have a complete sentence on one side and a complete sentence on the other side. What we're going to do in this formula is either use the semicolon or the colon in order to join those 2 sentences in a grammatically correct format. Let's go ahead and take a look at examples. For these sentences, you'll notice that in the first one, we have people saying nothing is impossible, period. I do nothing every day. In this example, we have each of the independent clauses or complete sentences on either side. We can certainly keep it just like this and it will be correct, but we can also use either the semicolon or the colon in this instance. For some, we can look at this as stylistic or to place emphasis on the relationship between the 2 different sentences. So we have people say nothing is impossible, I do nothing every day. What we notice on this aspect by using semicolons and colons is that the second part of this really places emphasis and gives us more information about the sentence that comes before it. In other words, they're sort of a sometimes cause and effect relationship, other times it's added emphasis, other times it's impact. It really depends on what the writer chooses to do. Nevertheless, when we choose the semicolon or colon, the goal is to place emphasis in some way on the relationship between the 2 complete sentences. Next, we have coordinating adverbs. Coordinating adverbs are words like however, nevertheless, therefore, furthermore. You can do a quick Google search and type in coordinating adverbs, and there are plenty of websites that provide a long list of those type of words should you need a list of different options to choose from. Let's go ahead and take a look at how this particular formula works with the process of combining. In this formula, we can see that we need to rely on punctuation in order to execute this particular formula. So, as I said before, we have our 2 independent clauses, our 2 complete clauses, one at the beginning and one at the end. What we're really focusing on here, or what the formula is semicolon, one of these coordinating adverbs, and comma. We must have this particular formula in order to combine 2 sentences using one of these words if it's in the middle. So we have therefore, however, meanwhile, accordingly, and so forth. It's important to remember that each one of these types of coordinating adverb terms have their own meaning. So you cannot just use any type of adverb because you want to acknowledge the relationship between these 2 sentences. So depending on what each of the sentences states, it'll determine what kind of adverb you're going to use. So using the same example from earlier, we have people say nothing is impossible, period. I do nothing every day. Or we can say people say nothing is impossible, however, I do nothing every day. You'll notice here that we have the exact same formula, the semicolon, the coordinating adverb, the comma, and then the rest of the sentence, okay? One thing you want to keep in mind is that sometimes these terms can be used as phrases instead of just a coordinating adverb. So let's take a look at what I mean by that. If you watched the other video regarding basic concepts, you'll learn that phrases can be moved periodically throughout a sentence. It can be found at the beginning, middle, or end. In this example, the however is being used as a phrase, and therefore we can actually move it around. So using the same sentence, we have people say nothing is impossible, new sentence, however, comma, I do nothing every day. You'll notice that this is the exact same sentence in all three examples. So what we did was use the however in the middle, and then we can also use the however in the end. You'll notice that there are no semicolons here because, as I stated before, the however is not being used to combine a sentence. In fact, the however is found within one sentence. If you're using it to interrupt or emphasize or give more information about one individual sentence, chances are you're probably using it as a phrase and you'll need the commas appropriately. If you put it at the beginning, you'll just need it right after it. If you put it in the middle, you'll have one before and one after. If you put it at the end, you'll have it right before it. Remember that when you're using the however in order to combine sentences, you'll need the entire formula. So just as you see here, people say nothing is impossible, complete sentence. Then we use the formula because we have the complete sentence on the other end. Next, we have what's called coordinating conjunctions. You might remember coordinating conjunctions from middle school or high school. We often remember them by what we call fanboys. It's not a boy band, but rather each letter stands for a type of coordinating conjunction. Unlike coordinating adverbs, we are limited to only just these, whereas with coordinating adverbs, we have a ton of words that we can use. Let's go ahead and take a look at how these are used in combining sentences. So, as indicated with the formulas before, we have our traditional independent clauses on one side, and we have our independent clause / complete sentence on the other. The coordinating conjunctions are and, for, so, or, nor, yet, but. And in this case, the particular formula to use this is to make sure we have a comma before it. So in that case, very much like the adverbs, we need to make sure we use the correct term that will demonstrate the relationship we want to convey when we're writing. So using the same example, we have people say nothing is impossible, I do nothing every day. Then we have people say nothing is impossible, but I do nothing every day. People say nothing is impossible, yet I do nothing every day. In some cases, we could use different types and they will still carry the same meaning, but in other cases, we cannot use other ones. For example, you can use nor, I do nothing every day. It wouldn't really make sense here in this case. Neither would the word or. So be sure that you are mindful about what kind of term you're using in order to execute the correct relationship between each type of these sentences. One thing to point out about words like but, yet, and, so is very similar to the word however. We have to ask its function. In this case, when we use a conjunction like but, yet, and, for, so, and we use it with a comma before it, it means it's functioning to combine the sentence only, meaning there's a complete sentence before and a complete sentence after. If you are using these words to combine sentences, you must have the comma before it. In some instances, we will use and but without the comma because what we're doing is actually not using it to combine sentences. So let's take a look at that. So in this example, we have people say nothing is impossible, but I do nothing every day, just like we saw earlier. If you look at these two sentences, the movie is short but important, I bought milk and cookies. You'll notice the word but and here, but you don't see the comma before it. That's because it's functioning differently. This is showing contrast within one given sentence, as well as this. The and is used to join what we call the object or the noun phrases. While it's not important to know necessarily those terms, what is important is to be mindful during your writing to determine whether or not a comma comes before one of these words. A good way to do this is simply to hit the find function. And when you hit the find function, you can just simply type the word here. And my recommendation would be to go through every single one of these. If you know the words but and can be confusing and you sometimes forget whether or not you should have a comma, a simple fix is to hit the find function, find them, and then ask yourself, do complete sentences come before and after? And if they do, then it's functioning to combine, and then you'll need the comma before. If you notice that there is no complete sentence on both sides, then chances are you're going to need to remove the comma. In this example, we have the movie is short. This is a complete sentence, but the other side, we do not. So in this case, we will not have the comma that comes before it. Next, we have what's called subordinating conjunctions. With these, they do look similar to the coordinating adverbs, words like however, nevertheless, even though, since, while. With this particular formula, there's two ways in which you can execute it. And it really comes down to your own personal style, what you're trying to communicate and convey, and the flow of the sentence. So you kind of have to analyze how it might work as you're writing. So let's take a look at some examples. In these sentences, I have the two original ones that need to be combined. I am not a fan of online learning. I cannot seem to focus my attention well. Using this first formula, we're going to use the word because. The reason why we're choosing because is because of the relationship between the two. Because of something, the other thing occurs. So here we start off by using the because at the beginning of the sentence. Because I cannot seem to focus my attention well, I am not a fan of online learning. If you choose to use the subordinating conjunction at the beginning of the sentence, you will always have a comma between the two clauses. Here we have I cannot seem to focus my attention well, comma, I am not a fan of online learning. Here we have our subordinating conjunction. This would be the only way that we could be able to execute this. If you are unsure about where the comma goes, then just flip it around. As you see here, I am not a fan of online learning, and then you should be able to put the word because between it. I cannot seem to focus my attention well. What we just did is execute the second formula. We chose to put the word because in the middle. Again, neither is better than the other. It just really comes down to how you want to write it and what you want to emphasize. Should you choose to use the subordinating conjunction in the middle, there is no comma that is necessary. Oftentimes, students will try to place a comma before the word because, but it is unnecessary. Next, we have what's called participial phrase. Before we get into participial phrase, let's talk a little bit about what a participial phrase is. A participial phrase is what we call a verbal, which is basically a word that stems from a verb or action word, but isn't necessarily functioning as a verb. These are typically presented with these specific endings, en, ed, d, tn, or ne when we're using it in the past. When we're using it in the present, we are typically using the ing word. If we look at these examples here, our past participle, invented by an Indiana housewife in 1889, that's our phrase. The first dishwasher was driven by a steam engine. Next, the present participle, working before unfriendly crowds. The referee has orders to exude poise under the most trying circumstance. In this case, working is our indicator that we're dealing with a participial phrase. Now again, I indicated that we are using a phrase, which means that they can be placed pretty much at the beginning, middle, or end of any given sentence, as long as you're punctuating it correctly. Let's go ahead and take a look. If we choose to use it before the main clause or our complete sentence, here we know we have Bob didn't notice a police car. This is our complete sentence. Now we're adding the participial phrase, speeding down the highway. This tells us more about this information here. Again, this is just one way where you don't have to break these up into different sentences. Now, you'll notice that speeding down the highway is not a complete sentence. So if you wanted to include that, you would have to lengthen it. For instance, you could say Bob was speeding down the highway, period. Bob didn't notice the police car. While you can include that, it sounds a little choppy. So what writers like to do is use some of these participial phrases just to attach it to the complete one. If you're using it at the beginning, you'll need a comma after that phrase. If you are using it at the end, then it will come before it. For instance, the gamblers silently arranged their cards, comma, losing themselves in thought. Again, it tells us more information about the gamblers silently arranging their cards. If you're going to use it in the middle, we have the real estate agent, comma, thinking of her profit potential, comma, decided not to buy the property. In this case, we have information in the middle. Down below, we have the past participle. Discouraged by the long hours and low pay, my sister finally quit her job. Or we have my sister, discouraged by the long hours and low pay, finally quit her job. Again, you'll want to be mindful about where you're placing things and whether or not you'll need a comma. So, of course, commas are going to be present in all of them, but especially when they're in the middle of the sentence, you'll need one before and one after. Let's look at the example. In this example formula, you have it at the beginning of the sentence. In this case, we will be adding the comma after it. Stepping on a cornflake, my sister instantly became a serial killer. My sister, discouraged by stepping on a cornflake, instantly became a serial killer. Again, two different ways that we can write this, but ultimately keeping and maintaining the same meaning. Really just comes down to a manner or style and what you would like to emphasize most. Now that you are familiar with the 5 different ways, take the time to practice and try it out on these sentences here. The sentences read, I asked my dad for a BB gun, period. He said we were a tribe of warriors, period. We were not warriors, period. How would you combine these sentences? For me, I might try one of 2 ways. I might say, I asked my dad for a BB gun, but he said we were a tribe of warriors and we were not warriors. The other one, I asked my dad for a BB gun, however, he said we were a tribe of warriors and we were not warriors.